Got my GoPro.
G'day, hey, hi, and welcome. Alright, so another voiceover here again, and today we're going to talk about risk, basically more risks of a motorcycle and stuff like that. So basically you're going to start off that the only time there's no risk with a motorcycle is when it's parked in the garage and you're nowhere near it. The second you throw your leg over the seat, the risk begins. So the first risk would be trying to get on the bike without knocking the bike over and falling over yourself, that type of thing, and then everything from there just kind of follows. So when we measure it as level of risk, it's probably, I mean, like coming down this driveway here. It's a rough driveway going from the sand to the pavement. There's a risk there. All that stuff. So you have to be able to calculate that. And then of course there's road conditions. They they can vary. Potholes, stuff in the middle of the road. So far I've had like a giant porcupine in the middle of the road that if you were to hit this thing, especially at night and day, there's risk, more risk at night a lot of times, because you can't see stuff coming out, such as deer and raccoons and whatever. I've had snow brushes in the middle of the road. Don't know why there's a snow brush in the middle of the road during the summer, but that type of stuff. And then of course, all kinds of things like that. Potholes, cracks, manhole covers, oil spills, slicks, whatever you can think of. Rain, weather in general, hot, cold, that type of thing. Then there's just, of course, the obvious, the cars, the other drivers and riders, believe it or not. Group rides, when you'll see this often. For example, around the time I did this run, there was I forget what the ride was for, but there was, I forget how many, but like 500 bikes or whatever, and there was 3 accidents within that. Now, 2 of them were involving a vehicle. One guy came out and somehow hit 2 bikers, and there was another one where the guy, I guess, was just acting kind of silly, and silly by, well, is the polite way of saying it. He was being stupid, and he went off the road. I don't think anybody was killed, but there was a risk there. The other thing is just when you're the unforeseen consequences of something. You're riding along and your chain snaps. I've had that happen to me before on other motorcycles. And so if you're lucky, the chain just comes off the bike or dangles behind the bike. If you're unlucky, the chain goes into the spokes or into the tire, locks you up, and then sends you for a cartwheel. There's a bunch of bikes there. Riding alongside other people, sometimes if you're riding too close, you'll see sometimes in these big rides as well, where you got a novice rider stuck in between a whole bunch of other riders that may or may not be novices, but you get one guy jams on the brakes a little bit too fast, and then the novice guy's either not paying attention or whatever, and bang, into the back of the other bike he goes. Or you got 2 people riding side by side and they bump into each other, all kinds of stuff like that. But the risk is always there, is I guess the bottom line. The risk will always be there when you're concerned with motorcycles. Passenger risk, except gear that you wear. If you don't, the less protective gear you wear, the higher your risk goes. The maintenance on your motorcycle, neglecting maintenance on your motorcycle, that's a big one. A lot of people tend to drive these things into the ground. I will say though, motorcycles are usually taken better care of on average than the average car. The average car, has motor oil in it from 15 years ago. You know what I mean? That type of thing where, like there's very few people that will adhere to a automotive maintenance schedule. Bikes, especially if it's a bike you really like, you tend to, like for example, this bike, I check the tires every time I go out. I do a tire pressure check once a week. I check the chain, I check for loose bolts, I check the brakes, I check the brake lines, I check, and all this takes about 5-10 minutes before every ride. If I go on a major ride, I lube up the chain. I lube the chain at least once a week. But if I'm going to go more than, say, like 100k there and back, particularly, I typically do that. Definitely keep an eye on your tires, the front end, the fork seals, the head bearings, all that stuff. wires, whatever it is, check the battery, is the battery holding charge? I monitor that stuff all the time, so my bike is pretty much got an eyeball on. Always check. I check the oil almost every time I take it out. I thought at first this bike was burning oil, but I don't think it is. I think it was just when I checked it one time I didn't do it right. One little peep about this bike is Triumph built a really nice bike, but they use a dipstick instead of. They couldn't have just put a oil inspection window like every other motorcycle on the planet, just to make things quicker, and simpler. Very, very minor gripe, but this is a wonderful machine to ride. But like anything, checking the brakes, checking the mirrors, checking the, nuts and bolts go loose, all that kind of stuff, because that does become added risk. And then, of course, the risk of speed. The faster you ride, the higher your risk is going to be. If you're doing wheelies, if you're doing burnouts, if you're doing, all kinds of stuff like that, endos, there's all kinds of stuff. If you're going knee down in every corner, being a street Rossi, that type of thing. So that all is considered risk. Then there's just the rider fatigue. That's another risk. A lot of people overlook that. I'll ride for an hour on this bike, then I usually get off, stretch a bit, and then I jump back on. You get tired. When you get uncomfortable, you get tired and you don't pay attention probably because everything becomes a distraction. One of the big things that become a distraction on a motorcycle when you're tired is that you're either looking at the speedometer, you're looking all over the place, you're starting to not necessarily doze off, but you're not a full alert, and in cold weather that tends to happen to you. You're good for the first couple of miles or whatever, and then it starts to wear on you. In the rain, if you start to chill, get a little bit hypothermic, then you're kind of distracted, your mind is distracted. When you're new to a motorcycle and you're getting used to it, where you're riding, you're constantly looking at the speedo, the engine check light, that type of stuff. Every time like when you go to signal, when you're not 100% used to a bike, you don't do things instinctively. You do things. You have to look down to hit the high beam, low beam, that type of thing. Just because you're not familiar with that specific machine. Once you get familiar with it, like for me, when I'm riding, I'm like 95% off the bike. I'm paying attention to the road. That's where my attention needs to be. I trust the bike a lot more now because I've put a bit of mileage on it to see if it's going to be reliable enough. All that stuff. Getting used to your brakes. Every motorcycle seems to have a little bit different setup on the brakes and knowing your stopping distance and stuff like that. So all these things can be risks. And to reduce the risks, there's not a lot you can really do other than attention to detail. Maintain good riding posture, know the machine you're on very well, get down your low speed handling. I can't stress that one enough. Learn how to read the road, for divots and cracks and stuff like that. Safe following distances, your safety margins. Anticipating people pulling out of driveways and not seeing, anticipating animals running out, that type of thing. Anticipating slippery surfaces or loose gravel or whatever it might be. So this is not to scare people, but just things that sometimes when you hear it ahead of time, it just plants that seed of thinking about it ahead of time. Planning your stops ahead of time. A lot of guys, they wait to the last minute to gear down, and then they get all messed up when they stop when they're still in third gear, and then it throws them off, and then when they go to take off they end up doing something funky and end up spilling the bike. Proper stops, that's a big one. Learning how to do that. Most people are going to dump the bike at a light. Reading intersections, that especially during traffic, that's where you have to pay the most attention to detail. Your head pretty much has to be on a swivel, and you have to drive like everybody's trying to kill you because they can. So you really have to put there's a lot of demand on a motorcyclist. When the rider's out there, every responsibility is him. You never assume that everybody can see you. You never assume that you're going to be the other person's going to make the right maneuver. You have to learn to anticipate and stuff like that, because if you don't, what ends up happening is it doesn't matter if the other guy's in the right or wrong, or if you're in the right or wrong, you're the one that gets hurt. Remember, 74% of all motorcycle accidents result in injury. Uh, Above 10 miles per hour, it's almost 90% will result in injury. Above 35 miles per hour is 100%, and above 50 miles per hour is almost 100% you're going to die. So these are things you need to know. So uh, don't put your safety in anybody else's hands. Assume that keep your safety margins where you need to. Assume that people are going to not see you. Assume that people are going to. And buzzing my friend's shop here. I'm gonna buzz my other friend's shop here. I like doing stuff like that. But like don't take for granted your safety. If you're going on a long trip, check your bike out before the trip. Check your bike at least, like I check it before every ride, just a quick preliminary look over. Shake the tires, shake the swing arm, see if the wheel nuts have come loose, see if the brake hoses are leaking. Just look at all that stuff. 5 minutes of your time, 10 minutes of your time before a ride could mean the difference between life and death. So that's how risk is. Again, the second you get on these machines, the risk begins. It's that simple. So anyway, I guess I'll leave it at about that. It's just something that to get people thinking of ahead of time, and there might be some stuff I didn't mention here, but use your imagination, stay safe. All right, have a great day.